Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today for History is Lunch in the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium. I'm Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. If you have not already, please silence your cell phones. A note, we just got word that there may be a siren at some point for a tornado watch. Luckily, this is the safe room in the building, so it really is. So it may get more crowded, but we're going to keep on with our program. A reminder of a few upcoming events. On Saturday in this space, from 9:30 a.m. to noon, we'll offer another beginning genealogy workshop with Joyce Dixon Lawson, who is our curator of research and genealogy. Guest speaker Kendra Wright will talk about the 2020 U.S. Census as well. You can register online on the MDH website for $10. One note, that day is also the Dixie National Rodeo Parade, which begins at 10:30. The streets around the museums will be closed from roughly 10 to noon, so plan accordingly. Visit the museums. And please plan to be with us at the Old Capitol Museum on Tuesday, February 11th, when Eric Foner will be the keynote speaker in the department's commemoration of the 150th anniversary of the election of Hiram Revels as the first African American to serve in the United States Senate. The reception and book signing is at 5 with the keynote address at 6. That program is co-sponsored by the Mississippi Humanities Council and Alcorn State University. Again, Tuesday evening. Finally, I hope that you will be here next week for History's Lunch when Tony Boudreau, Lance Harris, and Vin Stepanidis will present Grand Village of the Natchez Indians, Past, Present, Future. Today, though, we're delighted to have Jerry Mitchell discussing his new book, Race Against Time, a reporter reopens the unsolved murder cases of the civil rights era. On this day in 1994, the murderer of Medgar Evers was finally convicted, and that case could not have been made without the work of Jerry Mitchell. He has been a reporter in Mississippi since 1986. A winner of more than 30 national awards, Mitchell is the founder of the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting. That nonprofit is continuing his work of exposing injustices and raising up a new generation of investigative reporters. Help me welcome Jerry Mitchell.
It's great to be with y'all. I have to say a word about, some of the people in the audience today, we're very much a part of the civil rights movement that we're getting ready to talk about. And I think it'd be only appropriate. In fact, we'll go ahead and include the families as well. If you're a part of a family or someone was involved in the civil rights movement, or your family was involved in the civil rights movement, let's say you were young at the time, but obviously enjoyed and were a part of that, please stand at this time, and we want to thank you for being here. I see Mr. Meredith, you can stand up. And we just want to give honor to whom honor is due, and what an appropriate place for this to be. I got to step briefly into the Civil Rights Museum, and it just takes my breath away every time. And this is you can learn even more about this story in the civil rights movement here, and they've got a film and some other things. But this is the reward poster. There was 44 days in between the time that the Klan killed James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Mickey Schwerner, that their bodies were actually found buried in an earthen dam. But James Chaney is the native Mississippian in the group. The other, Andy and Mickey, were both from New York City and were part of the movement to really come down and register African Americans to vote and to start freedom schools, to teach. But James Chaney's from Meridian, and it wasn't that long ago that I visited his grave, and you notice there are actually supports. His headstone's been knocked over so many times, they actually had to have steel supports for it. But on the face of his grave, it says, "There are those who are alive, yet will never live, those who are dead, yet will live forever. Great deeds inspire and encourage the living." So I want to talk about some of those that do inspire us. And one of them is this man. And His name is Medgar Evers, and he basically, was involved in the civil rights movement even before it was kind of became the modern civil rights movement. He went and fought against the Nazis in World War II, came home only to fight racism all over again, in the form of Jim Crow laws that barred African Americans from restaurants, restrooms, voting booths. The same night that President Kennedy told the nation that the grandsons of slaves were still not free, Medgar Evers was shot in his back, in his driveway right here in Jackson. And his wife, Merle, and children ran outside, saw the blood, and screamed. 27 years later, I'm standing with his assassin, Byron D. LeBeckwith. The reason I was there was because I was obsessed, I don't know if you're like me, but if someone tells me I can't have something, I want it like a million times worse, right? And so there was something in Mississippi called the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. More than 132,000 pages of records. And basically they collected spy files on more than 10,000 people in Mississippi and outside of Mississippi. And so there are more than 132,000 pages of that. And the Mississippi legislature had voted, I found out, to seal those records for 50 years. So my first thought when I found that out was, well, there's something in there, right? Or they wouldn't be sealing them that long. And so developed sources began to leak me the files, and what they showed at the same time, the state of Mississippi was prosecuting Byron D. LeBeckwith for killing Medgar Evers. This other arm of the state, the Sovereignty Commission, which was headed by the governor, was secretly assisting defense trying to get Beckwith acquitted, and nobody knew that. So at the time, I wrote my story for the Clarion Ledger, which was October 1st of '89. The odds were literally more than 1,000,000 to 1 against the case ever being reopened and reprosecuted. But Merle Evers, there's a picture of what some of the files look like. They're online now, but they weren't back then. But Merle Evers believed, and she prayed, and some amazing things happened. A couple months later, Jackson police are cleaning out a closet, happened to find a box that contained the crime scene photographs of the killing of Medgar Evers, including the fingerprint of Byron D. LeBeckwith lifted from the murder weapon. A couple of months after that, Merle Evers shared with me her copy of the court transcript that she had saved in its safety deposit box. And a few months after that, Bobby DeLauder, the prosecutor in the case, found the murder weapon in his father-in-law's closet, which sounds like I'm making it up, but it really did happen. And so I did go see Byron D. LeBeckwith in April of 1990. He lived in Signal Mountain, Tennessee. He was just outside of Chattanooga. Spent about 6 hours talking to him. Absolutely the most racist person I ever spent serious time with, N-word this, N-word that. He was very anti-Semitic. Pretty much any race but the white race, you know what I mean? He was that kind of guy. And so we got done talking, and it was dark now, and he insisted on walking me out to the car, and I'm like, really? Yeah, that's okay. So he walks me out to the car, he gets me out to the car anyway, says, God will bless you if you write positive things about Caucasian Christians, and God will punish you if you write negative things about white Caucasian Christians. If he does not punish you, several individuals will do it for him. So his wife then made me a sandwich. I think you can guess what I did with the sandwich. So Beckwith did get indicted for the murder of Medgar Evers. He fought it. That was in December of '90. He fought extradition back to Mississippi. He lost that fight and wound up back here in Mississippi. Anyway, so there were a series of hearings and all that kind of stuff. And so anyway, one day while we were in a hearing one time, I overhear this. He's telling someone, "You see that boy over there? When he dies, he's going to Africa." And I turned to a friend of mine, I've always wanted to go to Africa. So not surprisingly, Byron D. LeBeckwith was convicted of the murder of Medgar Evers on February 5th, today's anniversary, February 5th, 1994. And, yeah, absolutely, it's worth clapping. And when, if any of you were there, you'll know what I'm talking about. You'll know this moment when the word guilty rang out. You could hear the waves of joy cascading down the hall until it reached a foyer full of people, black and white, who erupted in cheers. And Merle Evers and her daughter, Rena, erupted in cheers too. The next case I got involved working in involved a man by the name of Vernon Dahmer. This is Ellie Dahmer, his widow, and she's holding a photograph of him. But he was a farmer, businessman, NAACP. He joined the NAACP just after World War II, which was, they had to meet underground. I mean, it was deadly. If you were an NAACP leader, that was it for you. And so, but Vernon Dahmer believed in one thing, and that was, about the right to vote, that the right to vote would change the status of African Americans, to be able to vote, because they weren't able to vote, obviously, here in Mississippi for the most part. And so he dedicated him to the Klan didn't like that. Attacked, they lived in just north of Hattiesburg. The Klan attacked Vernon Dahmer and his family in the middle of the night, like 2 o'clock in the morning, and firebombed their house, set their house on fire, began firing guns into the house. Vernon Dahmer woke up, grabbed a shotgun, ran to the front of the house, began firing back at the Klansmen so his family could escape safely out a back window. Unfortunately, the flames of the fire seared his lungs, and he died later that day. A few weeks later in the mail came his voter registration card. He had fought his whole life for the right of all Americans to be able to vote, but never been able to cast a ballot himself. And at the time of the killing, he had 4 sons. In fact, in the military, 6 of his 7 sons served a total of 78 years for this nation. And when his sons returned home, this is what they found. The man who ordered this killing was this guy. His name is Sam Bowers. Sam Bowers was the head of the White Knights of the KKK in Mississippi, responsible for at least 10 killings in Mississippi, probably more. Bowers had been tried but never been convicted in this case. And so basically, after I found out about that, I went and met with Mrs. Dahmer and met with and Dennis, and basically, went down to Hattiesburg. They called me, and I met with them, and that kind of explained what happened. Then they went and met with the district attorney. District attorney initially got interested, but got cold feet pretty quickly. Always had kind of an excuse. Then another district attorney came in. It looked like nothing was going to happen in the case. And I was literally in Ohio going to grad school to Ohio State when I got a telephone call from this guy who wouldn't identify himself, but wanted to meet with me. So I flew back to Mississippi, and I met him and his buddy, and there were 2 sons of Vernon Dahmer, and I think there were several guns there anyway. And anyway, we met. Turned out this guy's name was Bob Stringer. He was a recovering gambling addict, and one of the 12 steps is to make amends for the bad stuff you've done in the past. And one of them was he worked for Sam Bowers and overheard Bowers give the orders to kill Vernon Dahmer. So the case got reopened. This is now 1997. So the guy had been a key witness back in the 60s had been this guy. His name was Billy Roy Pitts. He was involved in the killing, dropped his gun, got caught, pleaded guilty to murder, got a life sentence for that, pleaded guilty to federal charges, got time for that. And I was kind of researching what he and other guys, what time they had actually spent in prison, and got to him, and I'm looking through all this stuff, talked to the Bureau of Prisons, because I had to find out exactly how much federal time he did. And what I had been told, someone had told me, was he went to the Federal Witness Protection Program, and that's why I couldn't find a record of his serving his life sentence in Mississippi. So I'm talking to the archivist at the Bureau of Prisons in Washington, D.C., and so I said, now, how much time did you spend in federal prison? Well, it's 3.5 years. I said, okay. Well, now I understand he left federal prison, went in the Witness Protection Program, and the archivist said that's impossible. I said, what are you talking about? I said, well, there was no Federal Witness Protection Program back then. So what it meant was Bill Roy Pitts never served a single day of his life sentence in Mississippi. Like, just walked away. You ever heard of that one? And so I didn't know if this guy was alive or dead or where he was, but the internet was relatively new, and there was a website I knew of, and that I could get on, and you didn't have to have the city or the state. You could just type in the name and take your chances. And so I did, and up it popped. Billy Roy Pitts had his address, Denham Springs, had his telephone number, so I called him. First 20 minutes of the conversation went like this. How'd you find me? How'd you find me? I'm like, it's on the internet. He's like, the internet? I got an unlisted number. I'm like, I guess you have to take it up with them, So the result of my story that he had never served a single day of his life sentence, the Mississippi authorities issued a warrant for his arrest. He didn't like that. In fact, he ran. And so while he was on the run, he sent me this audio cassette, and when I got it, it was him talking. And this is how it began. Jerry, I just thought I'd let you know you've ruined my life. But I promised if I talked to anybody, I'd talk to you. So here's this tape. And on this tape, he proceeds to tell me all about his involvement in killing Vernon Dahmer, all about his involvement in all this other Klan violence. So shortly after this, he turned himself into the authorities. And this now leads to the arrest of Sam Bowers. In addition to Bowers' arrest, also arrested was like his right-hand guy, whose name was Devers Nix. And when the family brought Devers Nix in, Devers, by the way, was the head of, in case you haven't heard of it, the Klan Bureau of Investigation. I mean, we got some FBI agents here who can confirm this anyway. And so when the family brought Devers in, it was like the most pitiful sight you've ever seen. They wheeled him in the wheelchair, the green oxygen tank, and he goes up in front of the judge, and he's like, I can't take more than a couple steps without needing oxygen. Judge is like, I normally don't do this. I'm going to let you out without bond. A dozen days later, we catch him. This is like a reporter's dream. We caught him here. I'm not telling you the whole story how we figured this out, but it's in the book. But anyway, he got arrested. Yeah, he loved me. So fast forward now, Sam Bowers goes on trial, and guess who's there to testify on his behalf but Mr. Golfer. And so, and this is a tricky situation. I know y'all watch the cop shows like I do, where, the cops do the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and all this stuff. So you can claim your Fifth Amendment right at any point in time, including on the witness stand. So Sam Bowers is going on trial. This is August of 1998. And Devers Nix is there to testify to, in his defense, character witness, which is an interesting choice for character witness, I thought. But, and so I happened to overhear Devers Nix talking to his lawyer. And he's talking. His lawyer, and this is maybe a cruel detail. I don't mean it that way. His lawyer was this great criminal defense lawyer in the 1960s, but by now he's in his 80s, and he was still, great. They let him out of the nursing home to come over, and and so he's trying to work out a signaling system with Devers. Now, Devers, when you get over there, you need to take the fifth. I'm going to raise my hand. Devers like, okay. So Devers gets up there and starts testifying. I looked over his lawyer about 5 minutes later. So Devers kept right on testifying. Yeah, I was in the Klan. You know, he tried to spin it positive, like, while the Klan was a benevolent organization, passing out fruit baskets to the needy at Christmas. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor got, cross-examination prosecutor got him and said, Mr. Nix, just how many fruit baskets did you pass out? And Devers was like, none. I swear it was the funniest trial I ever covered in my entire life. The guy who represented Bowers was this guy. Next to Bowers is Travis Buckley. And he's a lawyer here in Mississippi. Some of y'all may have known Travis. The thing you should know about Travis, he was not just a lawyer for the Klan, he was also a leader in the Klan. In fact, he was actually indicted for the Dahmer firebombing at one point, okay? All right, just want to make that clear. And so Billy Roy Pitts, the prosecution is asking Billy Roy Pitts about, this planning meeting took place prior to the attack on Vernon Dahmer's family, about a month before the attack, and is asking Pitts who all was there. And it's like, well, I was there. Sam Bowers was there. Devers Nix was there. Travis Buckley was there. And he's kind of adds this list, and then the court reporter goes, "Oh, can you repeat those names?" And yeah. Let's see, Sam Bowers, Devers Nix, Travis Buckley. By now, I guess Buckley's woken up. He's like, "Objection, Your Honor! I have an urgent matter I need to discuss with the court." I bet you did. So Sam Bowers was convicted August 21st, 1998, and sentenced to life in prison, just like Beckwith. And the next case I got involved with, there's Bowers walking away after it happened, is the Birmingham church bombing case. The four little girls that were killed in the bombing in '63, September 15th, '63. And there was, not only were the four girls killed, there was also a fifth girl who was blinded, Sarah Collins, who lost an eye. But the last living suspect, or one of the two, is named Bobby Cherry. And weirdly enough, I started writing about other cases and what's other people looking at. And one of them was in Alabama. The FBI was looking at this case. And so I ended up interviewing Bobby Cherry, and then 6 months later, something like that, his wife emails me and says, "Bobby wants to talk to you." I'm like, okay. And he lived near Tyler, Texas, which, I grew up not far from there. I'm from the schizophrenic town of Texarkana, so I knew where it was. And in fact, my mom and dad are here. I should recognize my mom and dad. My mom and dad stand. Yeah, come on, y'all stand. Yeah, there you go. My mom, I told a few people this earlier. My mom just turned 80, and she still teaches men. She's a personal trainer, still. And she's teaching men half her age how to lift weights still. So I just want y'all to know that. Yeah. Don't mess with mama. So Bobby Cherry, like I said, his wife invited me over. So I go over, I meet him, took him out for barbecue because, well, I guess that's what you take Klansmen out for. I'm not really sure, but we ate barbecue, we talked. So I didn't have anything to do with that church bombing. I left that sign shop at 9:45 because I had to get home and watch wrestling. He pulled out this sworn statement from the woman and says, "Yes, I remember that night. Well, we're all sitting there watching wrestling." So, this is what they teach in journalism, you got to check everything out, right? And so I get back to the newsroom the next day and talk to our librarian. And I remember from when I was a kid, all they had on TV was maybe 2 or 3 stations, right? And the entire TV schedule ran in like a tiny box in the newspaper. I remember that from my childhood. And so I just talked to Susan and said, check with the Birmingham News and see what was on TV that night. Next day, I got an email from Susan. There was no wrestling. Like there hadn't been wrestling on for years, it turned out. So when Bobby Cherry he was arrested. And when he went on trial, well, I should tell you this other thing about Bobby Cherry. Let me mention one other thing. He got arrested. There's the guy on the left is Fred Shellsworth. He's the civil rights leader in Birmingham. In fact, he's the one that invited Martin Luther King to Birmingham. You see all those famous photographs and footage of Birmingham in '63. Well, he was the one who invited King to Birmingham and was part of that group there. And so one of the bravest guys in the civil rights movement, he was beaten, his house and church were blown up, and, talking about an incredible guy. And so I had heard that Bobby Cherry had something to do with this beating, the beating of Fred Shellsworth. And so anyway, he denied it, and then later on, I happened to get a book in the mail about the Shellsworth. It was just a biography of Shellsworth. And I saw there was a picture of the beating of Fred Shellsworth. So now I'm looking for Bobby Cherry in the photo, right? And, it's a real distant shot. You couldn't make anybody out. And so I called up the author and said, hey, are there any other pictures of the beating of Fred Shellsworth? And no, there's footage. I'm like, you're kidding. And so he pointed me to this, and that's what I'm showing you. It was a CBS documentary called Who Speaks for Birmingham, and they actually had the footage in it. And it was somehow got CBS to give it to me without having to pay $200 anyway. And so they sent it to me. But here's my problem. I had no idea what Bobby Cherry looked like back in 1957. I knew what he looked like now. And so his son, who was kind of estranged from, was a truck driver, and so I had him come over, and when he's passing through town, to look at it. And I played it for him. He goes, "Yep, there's Dad." Let's see if I can. And he's pointing to this guy right here, and you can see the cigarette. And so, and as the footage, it's hard to play footage. I try to do these things with the PowerPoints, but they don't do very well when you try to play footage. So anyway, basically what happens here is, this is a whole mob that beats up Shellsworth. But he pointed out something I didn't see. He said, yeah, you see him reach in his right front pocket? That's where he kept his brass knuckles. Sure enough, you can see him waylay Fred Shellsworth. Fred Shellsworth got a concussion from this, and his wife was stabbed, and so obviously they went to the hospital after that. But when Bobby Cherry went on trial, they showed this footage of him beating Fred Shellsworth. They introduced television logs to show there was no wrestling. And Bobby Cherry was convicted and given 4 life sentences, 1 for each one of those girls. Amen. Remember what I told you before? If someone tells me I can't have something I want like a million times worse, well, Sam Bowers, who never talked to the press, hated the press. We were satanic. That's what he referred to my profession, and so Bowers never gave interviews. But I guess I can tell it in the archives building. I'm giving away something. You'll find out in the book how I did it. I give it away, Katie. It's nobody here. Nobody here did it. I give away who leaked it to me, but it's another story. But anyway, so Archives and History did an interview with him, but it was sealed till Bowers was dead. I wanted that interview. And so I can tell now, because my book's out, Bill East, who's an investigator at the time for the Attorney General's office, they'd gotten it by subpoena, because I did a story mentioning this interview. They subpoenaed it, and then Bill let me read it. And that's how I got that. Now I can tell that story. And anyway, so I did. I went and read it. And in the interview, Bowers said he was quite delighted to be convicted. And by the way, if you're interested in this interview, they have the whole thing now. Bowers is dead. You can read the text. You can read. It's an amazing interview. I'll give you an example, and I use this in my book. One of his grandfathers opposed the KKK. He was a congressman here in Mississippi, right? And another grandfather was named after Abraham Lincoln. And that guy headed the most violent Klan organization in the United States. Amazing. You can read more about him in my book, but it's a fascinating story. He's a fascinating character. I despise this guy tremendously, but he's a fascinating character. But anyway, in this interview, he said, you can listen to the audio, he says he was quite delighted to be convicted and have the main instigator of the entire affair walk out of the courtroom a free man. And the man he's referring to is a guy by the name of Edgar Ray Killen, or as he's known locally, Preacher Killen. And so I called Preacher Killen up. We talked for quite a while. And then he said, there's some guy in Jackson just keeps stirring things up and stirring things up and stirring things up. And I just didn't have the heart to tell him it was me. So I took him and his wife out for catfish. Yeah, I like feeding them Klansmen. Anyway, and so... while we talked, I asked him if he had anything to do with killing the 3 civil rights workers. He said no. I said, what do you think should happen to those, that did do this? What do you think should happen to them? He says, I'm not going to say they were wrong. The men that killed the 3 civil rights workers, the 3 young men. And so then he proceeds to tell me this story. When Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, just to give a little background, at that moment in time, the FBI didn't know who killed him, right? And so they literally sent out agents everywhere. 2 of them showed up at the doorstep of Preacher Killen wanting to know his whereabouts on April 4th, 1968. He refused to tell them. But one of the agents left his cards. So, some time passed. Preacher Killen picked up the card, called the agent, wanted to know who killed King. The agent's like, why do you want to know? Killen says, man, I want to shake his hand. Sometimes people, they'll see, these old guys off, going off to prison or whatever, and they'll say to me, Jerry, why don't you leave these old guys alone? You know what I tell them? These were young men, young killers. They just happened to get old. Preacher Killen was convicted on the exact anniversary, June 21st, in 2005, and was sentenced to 60 years in prison. In fact, he just died last year. Y'all probably read the news about that. And so, but here's the hate he was responsible for. These 3 young men are buried 15 feet down. And the unfortunate rest of the story is, unfortunately, this hate has not gone away. In fact, it seems to be resurging, right? 5 years ago, right? Get this. A young man entered this church and killed these 9 beautiful people. And it just saddens my heart. I don't know about you. And I've got several here, and I don't remember them all. But, 2 years ago, this one happened. This was up in Pittsburgh, where a man went in and the Tree of Life Synagogue there in Pittsburgh and killed 11 people. He said he hated Jews, by the way. And then last year, I know y'all know about this. This was in El Paso, where basically... it's the deadliest mass shooting in our history. And a young man basically said that he thought that the federal government was trying to eliminate the white race. And so that's why he drove all the way to El Paso. lived elsewhere in Texas, drove all the way into El Paso, and killed 22 and injured 24. Before people hate, they fear, right? And before they fear, they dehumanize, giving themselves permission to destroy somebody either figuratively or literally. And, as a result of my reporting, it's nothing compared to what people in the civil rights movement went through. I've had dozens of threats, and one Klansman said he wanted to slit my throat and different things like that. Another said, he had pictures of me and knew where where our family lived. And yes, that was, frightening, but it led to an unexpected gift. And that's, the gift of living courageously, And living courageously is not about living without fear. It's about living beyond fear, right? It's about living for something greater than ourselves. And I think that's really the key to life, isn't it? And I think a lot of you are my age or so, and we know this. This is something you come to know, really. If you want your life to matter, we need to live for something greater than ourselves. To date now, there have been 24 convictions in these murders. And I am a person of faith, and I do believe God's hand's been involved in these cases. And, God loves justice. He does. And I know that. And so 24 convictions. And can you imagine it? And it all started right here in Jackson. It all started right here. That movement began right here. I think it's good. It is worth clapping about. I think that's a good thing to clap about. But the most amazing thing that I've witnessed has actually not been the convictions, which might surprise you. It's been some of the racial reconciliation. And not too long after Sam Bowers went off to prison, there was a hearing. And so Billy Roy Pitts testified in the hearing. This is after Bowers got convicted. I've got pictures of this. He testified in a hearing, and when he got done, he walked to the back of the courtroom, and he ran into Mrs. Dahmer. And Billy Roy Pitts apologized to Mrs. Dahmer and asked her to forgive him for killing her husband. And she forgave him. And she began to cry. And he began to cry. And as I walked out of the courtroom that day, I thought of people like Vernon Dahmer, who lived lives that mattered. And I thought about James Chaney's headstone, right? There are those that are alive that will never live, those who are dead yet will live forever. And in that moment it dawned on me, each day we're etching the words on our headstones. What do you want your headstone to say? May God bless you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. I've got just a couple things. I got a couple more things to say. Thank you. I think the credit goes to the courageous families. In fact, I saw her slip in. Rena, where is she? Where did Rena go? Where's Rena? Oh, there she is. Let's give Rena a hand. Yeah. Because of the courage of these families, they never gave up. They could have easily said, no, I don't want to go through that pain again. I don't want to do that. I don't want to deal with that. And that was a decision y'all had to make. And so real quickly, and then I'll try to open it to questions. I wanted to leave time for questions. I probably Left a lot for questions, but that's okay. So this is my book, and this is the commercial part of the speech. We got some, so I'll sign them for you. I will personalize for you. Hope you like it. New York Times liked it. But anybody don't like that? Okay. Garden and Gun liked it. How about that? They both liked it. So, in fact, the Garden and Gun review I thought was excellent. It was really good. It's a guy that used to be a reporter in Mississippi. So, and then this is the nonprofit I started, and I promise it's a nonprofit. No problem with that so far. And but Mississippi needs more investigative reporting, not less. Is that right? Yeah. You know, I'm not telling you anything you'd already know, but newsrooms, period, are vanishing in Mississippi, are shrinking to nothing. They're basically, it's awful. And you know, when I first got here, you know, I'm somewhat nostalgic about it, but I mean, I felt, and still do, I feel the Clarion Ledger, I felt very honored to work with so many talented people. And in fact, there were a group of them that came to book signing last night, and we kind of got together and took a picture, and it just brings back memories, and we've lost a lot of that. We've lost most of that. And so we want to preserve the reason we started it, and I'm working with Debbie Skipper. Some of y'all may know her from the Clarion Ledger. She was kind of the hidden person at the Clarion Ledger, and believe me, the most important, not me. And she shepherded everything that she's done throughout my work. She was my editor. And anyway, this is our website. You can go on there. We have been investigating prisons. We've basically been telling state officials for a year that their prisons are going to there's something's going to happen. At one point, we quoted a guy saying it's a ticking time bomb. And then in December, they blew up. It wasn't a shock to people who read my reporting, I'm sure. And the good news is this. What we're doing with this is we are giving this away. We are producing this investigative reporting and giving it away for free. And so our stories are running in virtually all the major newspapers in Mississippi, from Tupelo to the Gulf Coast to Natchez, in the Clarion Ledger and Meridian. And so they're all running our stories. And that's the importance of this. We want the stories to get out. We don't want to have just our little website and, oh yeah, you got to come find us, you know. No, people need to know. That's what this is for. We're about exposing, you know, shining a light and exposing the darkness. And we're now on the Millsaps campus. So I know we got some Millsaps grads around here. And it's great. We're in the president's old house, and we have 10 Millsap students working with us. So we are working with them, trying to raise up, as we say, the next generation of investigative reporters. So anyway, I think that's it. That's it. So anyway, that's it. Thank you. Anyway, questions? Yeah, he's saying if you got a question. Got one way back here? Yep. Wait till Chris gets around. He's got a microphone.
Charles Holmes.
Hey.
One of the first things a dictator tried to do is destroy the press, freedom of press. And I'm so glad that constitutional law say that the First Amendment, we hear a lot about the Second Amendment, but the First Amendment, a preferred freedom.
Yep.
That's what we hear about enemy of the press. That's what he talking like a dictator.
Yeah.
And I read about that case about in Natchez. That was a very vicious plan. But
Yep.
I learned more about that from some of the students that, not LSU, was it LSU?
Yeah, LSU.
Right, LSU. Amazing.
Yeah, they've collected, he's mentioned about LSU. They've collected, I may have my number, I may be off of my numbers a little bit, but I think they have collected either 150,000, 160,000 FBI records. You know, they're on the KKK on these cases of violence during this era. So they're becoming a resource for that, which is terrific. And some others have been doing this too, the work, Northeastern and Syracuse Law School as well. Go ahead.
Hi. Concerning the point about the convictions that were finally
I know.
made,
It's
I want to make the point that so many
Exactly.
of us feel that these people lived their lives
I agree with
after
you.
they took somebody else's life.
You are correct.
And by the time they're
It's
convicted,
that much of justice, isn't it?
right, they're old and ready to die.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So when it comes to when we talk about racial healing, is that possible with
Yeah.
so much to be worked out?
No, I agree with you. And the other thing we should say, I mentioned about how many convictions there are, but the other thing I should mention is there were more than 120 families that, never saw a conviction. Sure, I'm sorry. I'll repeat the question. She was kind of talking about these people weren't convicted until the very end of their lives, and I agree with her. I mean, it's obviously it's just a fraction of justice of what it should be. But I said the thing that probably we should also point out is, yeah, there were 24 convictions, but there were, I think, more than 120 families that never saw any kind of justice. Anyway, go ahead.
Jerry, why do you think these guys like Byron Daly Beckwith and Pitts and Killen would talk to you, or want to talk to you? Because if I was in their position, you'd be the last person I'd want to talk to.
Yeah, I know. I especially when I was younger, I looked like Opie. I think they saw me as one of them. I'm about as much of a wasp as you can get to be. You know what I mean? Southern wasp, and I kind of fit that definition. And Beckwith, before he let me come talk to him, it wasn't like he just let me come. He had this whole quiz I had to pass. Like, where do you live? Where do you go to church? What are your parents' names? It was a long list of questions. I only put part of them in the book. And so, I could have refused to answer, but I knew he'd like my answers. So I just answered honestly, and he was like, come on. So he asked me where I lived, and I didn't tell him that. I just said, yeah. I told him, I said South Jackson, is what I said. So anyway, yep.
Question, you referenced collections of data at LSU and Syracuse.
Yeah.
Do you have a reference to them?
I can get your contact information.
Would love to.
Yeah, Stanley, the quick way would just be contact my buddy Stanley Nelson. He's a reporter, does the same kind of reporting that I do. He's asking about where LSU, I guess you heard that. Contact Stanley Nelson, the Concordia Sentinel. Tell him I told you to call, and you want to know how to get in touch with the LSU. He works with them. Yep. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mitchell, for your presentation. My question is, are we not fighting a modern day civil war still?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I mean, we're a nation. I think the race against time now is whether we're going to be able to live with each other, right? Whether we're going to remain the United States of America. We seem to be split now, right? Fractured. We're fracturing along every single line, it seems like. And that's a sad thing. And our nation is about being able to live together with people, even if we don't agree with them. And unfortunately, that's not what's happening,
Thanks.
Yes.
For that brilliant exposition. A simple question. I'm just wondering, why is it that the KKK was allowed to exist for such a long time, terrorizing people and,
Right.
and harassing them and intimidating them and killing them, and no legal action was taken against an organization that was terrorizing such a substantial part of the community?
Well, to be honest, it was historical, The Klan started, let's talk a little Klan history because I think it's interesting and worth knowing this. So the Klan started after the Civil War. It kind of came, and the idea was they were going to terrorize African Americans. There was a tremendous amount of violence during that period of time. It was the South where that happened. And that was it was, they viewed, and if you know this part of history, and this led to the resurrection of the Klan in the teens and 20s. There was a film called Birth of a Nation. And it's kind of an important film historically, but it was also a horrible racist film. If you've ever seen it or even seen clips of it, there are African Americans that depicted in film. There are no African Americans in the film. They're blackface, and in the story, which was shown in this film, which was shown at the White House, by the way. Basically, the Klan is the rescuer. Okay. And here's an interesting detail related to that. That claim appeared in a Mississippi textbook here in Mississippi that was published in 1959 and used into the 60s, that the Klan rescued the South. Do you follow what I'm saying? There was at the Killen trial in 2005, the former mayor of Philadelphia got up and testified that the Klan was a good organization. So you have this pervading belief, and then in the teens and 20s, to explain a little bit more about that, the Klan existed during that time frame, and what a lot of people don't realize about the kind of the second incarnation of the Klan, the Klan was national at that point. There were 4 million members of the KKK nationally. They served in legislatures, not just in the South, Pennsylvania, Indiana. Indiana had a Klan governor. Did you guys know that? You know, Indiana had a governor that was a member of the KKK. Of course, we did too, Theodore Bilbo. And but it became, and you can even watch this footage. Just go to YouTube. The Klan actually, men and women, I think maybe I don't remember the children, but anyway, they're definitely men and women, marched down Pennsylvania Avenue, marching in their caps, open-faced, marching down Pennsylvania Avenue in the 20s. So amazing. And then, of course, the 50s and 60s when the Klan resurrected again. I know I'm answering a long question, but what I'm trying to say is the Klan was viewed by the white South as the savior, not as terrorists, even though they were terrorists. We just need to call it what it is. It was terrorism, plain and simple. And you're right, it should have been dealt with at the time. But the problem, let's go to the 60s. For example, in the case that we talked about, the Mississippi burning case, the sheriff and the deputy sheriff and a number of other law enforcement were members of the KKK in Neshoba County. And Dick's here, he can tell you all about that. He grew up with all that. So if you need some Neshoba County history, go see Dick. But I will say this about Dick, he's in my book. He did an incredibly brave thing in 1989. And I think these are the kind of things I think that began to turn the tide in places like Neshoba County. Dick got up, it was the 25th anniversary of the killings of those 3 young men. And Dick got up and apologized to the families for what had happened. And nobody had ever done that. We thank you, Dick. And now the rest of the story, which is, I should tell this anyway, which is 2007 that the mayor got elected? In 2007, Philadelphia elected a black mayor, first African American mayor in that. It's a majority white county. Like 2/3, is that right? It's about 2/3 white, okay? African American mayor. He is still mayor in Philadelphia to this day and has basically no one's running against him. I think that says something. That's great. Anyway.
Time for a couple more questions.
Sure. If anyone's got another one.
Jerry, what in your background convicted you to spend your life doing this? We're grateful you are.
I don't know, it's always stuck in my craw when people got away with stuff. You know, that's probably what made me a reporter, and especially murder. And I think the thing that made these murders so terrible was not just that these guys got away with murder. It was the fact that everybody knew they got away with murder. And that's what made it so horrible. That's what bothered me. I went to see the movie Mississippi Burning, which I don't even recommend. It's a fictional film. It's, you know, facts-wise, it's all over the map. A lot of it made up or borrowed from other places. But I saw it with two FBI agents who investigated the case. Roy Moore, some of y'all may have known these folks. I know a bunch of y'all knew Jim Ingram. So they were there at the movie, along with Bill Miner, who I know a lot of y'all knew, who covered all that. And so after the movie was over with, I was like, no, wait a minute. You know, because I knew none of this. This is all horrible ignorance about the civil rights movement, especially the violence attached to it. I knew nothing about the case. Like, nobody ever got tried for murder? And there were more than 20 men involved in killing 3 young men, and nobody tried for murder, for a triple murder? And that was what I couldn't wrap my head around. And that kind of started my journey, yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
I'm Bob Moment from Tougaloo, Mississippi.
Yeah, good to have you.
You've heard of Tougaloo, I'm sure.
Tougaloo. Let me say this about Tougaloo. I mean, thank God for Tougaloo.
Yeah.
Y'all were the place, the people in civil rights, the safe place for civil rights, where the civil rights movement really began in Mississippi.
Safe haven in Woodward Chapel.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
This is not so much a question as it is a response from you. Maybe I'm wrong. And historically, I recall that Andrew Johnson was acquitted by 1 vote.
Right. And you're talking about the impeachment trial. Yeah.
Yes. Had he been impeached, I suspect that Reconstruction would have taken a different path.
Probably so.
Maybe federal troops would not have been pulled out of the South.
If Lincoln hadn't been shot, I mean, I think you kind of can.
Yeah, right.
I think that's an interesting scenario.
So that
to
was
think
an
about.
acquittal by 1 vote, but it was an acquittal.
Yeah.
We come to today, and we're about to get an acquittal today.
Yeah.
And I just hope that Americans can look into what's really going on in this country and kind of get together and say, let's put it back together. We've got these people that are just pulling us apart.
That's what I think. I think that I agree with you.
I'm not
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that we're allowing things to tear us apart that we should not allow to tear apart. So, absolutely. I guess we got 1 minute.
Yeah, if we got one more
Yeah.
on this side.
She changed her mind. She has a question. Oh, somebody else. That's Luther.
Jerry, you mentioned Mississippi Burning.
Yeah.
Mississippi Burning says that murder was solved by two FBI
Yeah.
agents, 1 white and 1 black, beating somebody up in a cabin. Why don't you tell them how you found out and figured out how that murder really was solved?
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to tell it. It was solved because of a very brave Mississippi Highway Patrolman by the name of Maynard King in Neshoba County. And he was befriended by Joe Sullivan, who was the inspector in that case. And Maynard King was buddies with some of those guys. Neshoba County's a small place. Everybody knows everybody. And he found out. However he found out. And he told King, King told Sullivan. And then Sullivan put out the order. It's a long story. It's in my book. But basically the $30,000 reward, in my opinion, was a ruse. And there was $30,000 actually delivered to Sullivan. But the money never went anywhere. And I think he just used it as kind of petty cash to pay the informants. That's what I think happened. Because I've basically got it confirmed the whole way to Sullivan's hands. And but Maynard King is the one that told him at the Holiday Inn in Meridian, Mississippi, while he was eating a steak. So anyway, and I got the rest in the book. So anyway, thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it.
Before we leave, just a few words. The Sam Bowers oral history that Jerry mentioned can be found on the Mississippi Department of Archives and History's website, the Digital Archives page. You can listen to it all there. Saturday, genealogy workshop in this room. Tuesday, Eric Foner at the Old Capitol. And then next Wednesday here, the Grand Village. We've got copies of the book for sale. Jerry will personalize them for you. Thank you all for coming. Help me thank Jerry Mitchell for this program today.